Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bristol Breakup Club with me and Stowe Family Law and today's special guest, Nina Bambrey. The Bristol Breakup Club is a small and welcoming club set up a couple of years ago to provide group support for anybody who's navigating their way through a breakup and a divorce in a safe and friendly environment with other people who are going through the same experience. So I'd like to first of all thank you all for being here today. My name is Claire Macklin and I'm a breakup and divorce coach, supporting my clients through the emotional ups and downs of any breakup or divorce with confidence and dignity and strength. Stowe Family Law are the largest specialist family law firm in the UK, and they have offices all over the country, and they work really hard to provide the best service for their clients. And that includes collaborating with professionals like myself and Nina to provide a bespoke service for their clients. I'm so represented today by Becca Hadley and Abigail Jones. And to introduce Nina, Nina is a certified parenting coach. She's also an author, a researcher, and a very skilled circus artist as well. And she's also partway through a PhD looking at the role of adult attachment and attunement in child wellbeing. She has a background in Steiner education and is a parent herself. So without further ado, I will hand over to Nina, who's going to talk today about whether divorce necessarily has to damage your children. So thank you very much, Nina.
Thanks, Claire. So I'd really love to talk to you today about how we can support our children more effectively through the process of divorce. So all of you here today were at some point children, and if you were really lucky, you had an idyllic childhood, you spent your days skipping through the daisies, your parents showered you with compliments, you got on amazingly with your siblings, got A stars at school, and maybe you rode to school on the back of a unicorn. But if you were like most of us, things probably weren't like that. Like, you might not always have got along with your parents. You might have fought with your siblings. Maybe your parents split up, or there was a bereavement, or, you know, there could have been all sorts of different challenges that happened to you in your childhood. And I bet that if you think of one of those challenging moments, you can probably also remember how the adults around you responded to that situation. So were you allowed to talk about your feelings, or was it the thing in your family to kind of squash your feelings way down deep and never talk about the thing that was troubling you? My family situation was a bit more like the latter situation. My parents broke up for the first time when I was 6 years old, and the way it was handled, looking back on it, was really strange. So I remember being 6, going into the assembly hall at school and sitting down on the kind of beige, itchy carpet, and a teacher coming up and sort of ushering me out of the hall. And I was called into the head teacher's office. And the head teacher was a really lovely woman. And she told me that my mum had phoned her to say that my dad had left. And so that was the way that I found out that my parents had split up. And because I was only 6, I didn't really know that that wasn't the normal way that you found out that your parents had broken up. But I can definitely remember sort of feeling ashamed, like feeling a bit weird and singled out by the fact that I was the one who was taken out of assembly. And I didn't really want to tell my friends about it. And I also kind of got the impression, because my mum didn't tell me about it herself, I felt like, well, maybe this is something that I shouldn't talk about. So I'm sure that you're all handling your breakup or divorce very differently to that. And the message that I'd like to give you during this talk is that life contains challenges, and actually the way that we handle those challenges provides an opportunity for us to kind of role model for our children, that whatever kind of difficult situations arise in life, we can find the strength to overcome them. There was actually a study that was carried out in Bristol over a 20-year period, and it was on something called the internal locus of control. So the internal locus of control is to do with how empowered we feel within our own lives. So if you've got a strong internal locus of control, that means that you understand that the actions that you take have an impact on the circumstances of your life. So if you've got an internal locus of control, it means you're more likely to eat healthily and exercise, for example, because you understand those things are going to have an impact on your well-being. If you've got more of an external locus of control, you might feel less empowered in your life. So you might blame external circumstances for what's going on for you. You might find it hard to make decisions and kind of turn to other people to make decisions for you. And so what we would really like for ourselves and our children is to have more of an internal locus of control, because actually it has lots of benefits, even longevity. You know, you're likely to live longer if you've got a stronger internal locus of control. So this study, just to go back to that, it was a study of mother-daughter dyads, so mothers and daughters, and what they discovered was that the children whose families had had some kind of challenge, like some kind of fairly major challenge, and overcome it successfully, the daughters in those families had a much stronger internal locus of control. So that's why we have a great opportunity. If we handle difficult situations correctly, we can give our children the skill of resilience to carry forward with them into the future. So I'm divorced myself. Quite recently, I actually apologised to my son, he's nearly 13, and I said to him, I'm really sorry that you had to watch me go through that breakup and kind of, yeah, watch the level of kind of upset and hurt that I felt during that situation. And he said to me, it's okay, Mum, because you've shown me that whatever difficult thing happens in life, I can overcome it. And so I just thought that was really beautiful, that he'd got that lesson from watching the way that I had kind of approached that situation. I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, so I'd like to invite you to reframe divorce as a transformative experience. So one of the ways that we can handle divorce or breakup well is by really staying with our feelings. So ideally making time every day to kind of consciously feel and work through whatever difficult emotions that we're having, whether that's kind of anger, sadness, or even despair, because there's evidence actually that those stronger emotions, if we can really stay with them, they pass, quite quickly. Most big feelings kind of only last about 90, sit with them. It allows our bodies to kind of fully process and move on from those big feelings. Working with someone like myself or Claire can also be really helpful, so that you can actively kind of talk through the thoughts and feelings that you're having. Practices like journaling can be really helpful as well. I think it's important to realise that you don't have to hide the way that you're feeling from your children. So I recently worked with a woman who was going through a bereavement. She's got 2 children, one who's 5 and one who's 8. And when she came to me, she was really struggling because she felt that she had to squash her feelings down and kind of put on a brave face for the children. But actually, she was finding that because of this, she was actually feeling a lot worse and tending to kind of children. And so I invited her instead to just kind of stay present with the feelings when the children were there, and just kind of communicate with them in an age appropriate way about what was going on for her. Like, Mummy's feeling really sad at the moment because of, Granddad passing. And she actually found that just kind of staying present with her feelings started to make her feel a lot better, and also allowed her to be more present with the children because she was being more present with herself. And she told me this lovely story of how she she burst into tears one day at the dinner table, and both of her boys stopped eating and they came over and like gave her a big hug. So it was actually a really lovely kind of moment of connection. And by the end of the coaching process, she was sort of starting to have moments of joy again with the children. So it just kind of shows that consciously handling and processing emotions can be a really effective way to kind of move forward and heal. Something that I think is really important as well is staying with the liminal. So when we go through a big kind of life transformation, we might go through a period of time where we feel lost. So I was with my ex-husband for 10 years. And during that time, it sort of felt like our identities sort of became quite woven together. And so when we broke up, I had a big mixture of different feelings. But one of the feelings was feeling a bit lost, like feeling like I didn't know who I was anymore. And I've done quite a lot of reading about grief and transition processes, and what actually happens when we stay with those feelings of like, I'm not quite sure who I am now, or I'm not quite sure where my life's going. We actually allow an opportunity for new neural pathways to form in the brain. And that's an opportunity for us to develop new strengths and capacities that we didn't have before. So there is actually transformative potential in going through a divorce or breakup. And that's something, again, that we can role model for our children. So the capacity to stay with discomfort is a really important life skill. I'm sure you've all heard this before, but it's really important to not to talk about things that we don't like about our ex in front of our children, because that can create a feeling of dissonance within them. So if you're saying bad things about the other parent, the child might start to get a bit confused, or they might worry that if they love or express warmth to the other parent, they might be rejected. So it's important that if we've got any somewhere else to process that and keep it separate from the children. Ideally, if we go through this kind of grieving process really thoroughly, we can start to get to a place of acceptance towards our ex-partner. So we can get to a place where we've really grieved for all of the things that it isn't possible to have from them and with them. And from that place of having really fully grieved, we can start to find acceptance for the way that things are now. And hopefully we can kind of offer a bit of acceptance towards really difficult process. Like I had some quite difficult stuff to work through with my ex. Like, for example, he was or still is in a lot of debt, and so wasn't able to pay me any maintenance. And I made the decision that I wanted to kind of preserve, goodwill between us, rather than kind of fighting to get money that he didn't really have. So that was quite a difficult process to go through. But in the end, I decided that it was really important that I was able to focus on the best in him. And I came up with a phrase, which is, he's a generous and loving father. And that's something I'd really invite you to do, is to think about your ex-partner and see if you can find something that you can authentically appreciate about them, and then try and have that thought in the back of your mind when you're interacting with them, because on some level they're likely to feel it. And it also really helps your child if they sense compassion and warmth towards their other parent. If you're a single parent, it's really helpful to find create met in your relationship. For example, I've just put this picture up because one thing that I did was join a group around kind of going on trips and holidays for single parents, because actually, like, I really love to travel, but sometimes going on a trip on your own with a child or with children can be quite exhausting and stressful. And so finding a group to have those kind of experiences with can be really fun. You can also find other single parent families to just, hang out with. You could sort of swap cooking, just doing normal things like going to the park, but sometimes just having people alongside you who are in a similar situation can be really helpful. So in supporting your child around the divorce or breakup, it's important that you prioritise high quality time with them every day. So it's not necessarily time where you talk directly about what's happening, but just time when you're really focusing on them. So ideally, you'd put away your devices and have, at least 20 minutes when you're really, making a lot of eye contact. If they're younger, kind of getting down onto their level and offering them some really high quality engagement. It can be an opportunity for them to share with you what's going on for them as well. But in general, like those moments of high quality connection are what give your child the sense of safety and security that they need to overcome challenges. So having a kind of a secure attachment relationship with you is actually the foundation of resilience. Opportunities for them to kind of do creative play or drawing with you if they're a bit younger. It can also be a really helpful way for them to kind of express and explore feelings that they might be having. If you've got an older child or a teenager, you might want to kind of find a time every day where you can kind of sit together and, have a snack or have a cup of tea and a biscuit, and just give them the opportunity to talk about whatever's going on for them. Because if they've got opportunities to kind of talk and process, then their feelings are less likely to kind of come out in behaviours at school or, in kind of other ways that are less direct. So there's a process called emotion coaching, which I find really helpful. It's developed by a psychologist called John Gottman. It's something that you can use with almost kind of any age children, but it's a helpful way to give them the tools that they need to regulate their emotions more effectively. So the first stage starts with you. So developing a greater awareness of your own feelings is a great starting place from which to understand your child's feelings. So notice what's going on for you, and then see if you can kind of tune in more deeply to what's going on for your child, and just kind of observe their behaviour, their body language, just try and kind of tune into those sort of subtle cues. And then you can use that noticing of how they're feeling as an opportunity to connect with them. So, for example, if your child comes home from school and, they might seem a little bit hunched or they seem a bit quieter than normal, that could be a great time to say to them, I'm noticing you're a little bit quieter than normal, and I wonder what might be going on, or if there's anything that you want to talk to me about, and just sort of invite them to share with you. It's also important to be respectful, if they're ready to share with you in that moment. You label their feelings. So see if you can get them to kind of describe what they're feeling in more detail. If they're younger, you might want to kind of offer them some words like, I wonder if you're feeling sad, or that looks really frustrating. Can you describe how that feels for you, because in describing the feeling, it helps them to move from the amygdala, which is the kind of the more primitive part of the brain, into the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain associated with reasoning. So simply helping them to label their emotions can actually help them to move from feeling reactive or being reactive into conscious processing of the feeling. The next stage of emotion coaching is to validate your child's experience. So just kind of, rather than offering advice at this stage, you can just say, that must be really hard, or yeah, I can understand how that feels, and just kind of let them know that you see what's going on for them and that you understand. And then the kind of final stage of the emotion coaching process is to find solutions together. So see if both of you can kind of come up with creative ways of solving that particular problem. So the final thing that I'm going to talk about is rituals of reconnection, and actually also kind of rituals around parting. So taking time to kind of honour the moment when your child comes back, and also when they go to the other parent's house. So particularly to begin with, those transitions can, they can trigger quite a lot of big feelings for your child. So I think it's really helpful when your child comes back to have something that you both like doing together that you can kind of go straight into, and especially if it's an activity that involves quite a lot of kind of focused one-to-one attention, or if you've got more than one child, an activity that you can do together in a group that you all enjoy, and allows you to reconnect. So when my son was smaller, when he came back from his dad's, we used to go swimming, because for young children, that can be a really nice activity, and it means that you get a bit of skin-to-skin contact, which really helps with that kind of bonding process. But it's just important to be aware that, both of you, because probably the culture is quite different between the two houses, and so there needs to be a little bit of time for them to kind of recalibrate, and for you to recalibrate as well, and kind of connect back in with each other. Now that my son's older, our kind of ritual when he comes back from his dad's is that we go to IKEA for meatballs, which is something he really enjoys, and it means we've got some face-to-face time, and we can just kind of catch up with each other, usually have a bit of a kind of a laugh and joke, and kind of get back into being together. Connection can be built in very small moments. So children are really sensitive to how we respond to them. Like if we look up and greet them when they enter the room, they get the message that we love and care about them. And if we kind of, if we're looking at our phone and we don't look up when they come into the room, they might subtly get the message that they're not important to us. And so I think taking care of all of those little moments as much as we can is an important way to help your child really feel like they're cared for and that they matter to you. And again, when they're making the transition to the other parent's house, you can, if they're older, you can kind of brainstorm together about what might make that easier. So like my son he started getting the bus to his dad's house in Glastonbury about a year ago. To begin with, he was really anxious about it. And we found that, doing some kind of physical activity before he got on the bus was really helpful, just so that he'd expended a bit of energy, and then it was easier to kind of sit still for the hour and a half that it takes to get there. But just taking a moment to kind of give them a hug, look them in the eyes, let them know that you're gonna miss them, or you're looking forward to seeing them again when they get back. And as I mentioned before, if you can kind of work on creating a bit of warmth between you and your ex-partner, if you're kind of handing over in person, that can be really helpful. And it has a really positive impact on your child to be able to see the two of you getting along. So the main thing that I'd love you to take from this presentation is that divorce or breakup can be an opportunity for you to role model for your children, that whatever difficult stuff life might throw at you, if you can meet it with compassion, humour and strength, then there's gold in that opportunity. You can turn it into growth and into a way to become even more kind of joyful and fulfilled within your life.
Thank you very much, Nina. That was so helpful. There's a couple of questions that have popped up into the chat, and I've got some questions too, and I'm sure some of the others have too. Should we start? Let's start with the ones that have come in from the chat from the people watching. Somebody has asked, what should I tell my children when or if my ex-partner cancels his visit at the last minute and they express disappointment? Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, how should I handle that then with my ex as well? So there's kind of two questions there, really. Okay. Handling it with the children and handling it with the ex.
Yeah, I guess there could be two pieces to handling it with the children. So I guess the first thing would be to empathise with them. So to kind of check in with how they're feeling about it, and offer some validation around the disappointment that might create for them. I think ideally it's really nice if you can support them to empathise with their other parents, so that they might be feeling really disappointed. But one of my kind of mantras in life is to try and make the most generous assumption. So to try and assume that they're doing the best that they can at the moment, and for whatever reason, that they're not able to be there on that occasion. So support the child to express their feeling first, and then if you can, try and sort of stretch into a little bit of empathy for the other parent.
There's a couple of things that I noticed there as well, because I think that bit about offering the validation for the child feeling disappointed is really important. And that's very different to bad-mouthing your ex. Acknowledging their validating and acknowledging their feelings is very different to you bad-mouthing your ex to the child in order to elicit that disappointment. But I wonder, is there a line, do you think, between, you were talking about having empathy for the ex-partner, and I absolutely agree with you. One of my mantras is everyone is doing the best they can with the resources they have at this particular moment in time. What though? Where's the line between that and making excuses for the ex-partner, which isn't always helpful, in that it can increase sort of disappointment because you're not really telling the truth at that point?
Okay.
Sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's important to offer empathy, but also to have really clear boundaries. So I can't kind of, I don't know the specifics of the situation, but I think it's important just to be clear about, what's okay for us and what isn't, and definitely communicate that to the ex-partner. I spent a bit of time studying something called NVC, which stands for non-violent communication, and it's a kind of method for kind of resolving conflict that centers around an awareness of feelings and needs. So basically trying to kind of ask in a very clear way for what we need, but without using kind of blame language towards the other person. So you might kind of say something like, when you didn't turn up to connect Sam, both of us felt really hurt. It's really important to me that if we make agreements in the future that you keep them. And then you might kind of have some kind of boundary or consequence around that, if that makes sense. So I think absolutely work out what your boundaries are and stick to those. And I'd be happy to have a more in-depth chat around your specific situation as well, if that's helpful.
Thank you. So there's a couple of other questions. Let's just open them up. 2 seconds. Okay, so somebody here says the 9-year-old is very closed with his feelings. And when he gets upset, he closes down and won't talk about what's happening. And so I worry about him not learning a healthy way to deal a healthy way to deal with his emotions. Do you have any suggestions for how I can help him with this, to help him to access and explain what he's feeling?
Okay, yeah, I wonder about there's something called the window of tolerance, which I quite like as a metaphor. So in the diagram, there's a picture of a window, and the window kind of represents the place where we feel kind of really calm and happy and well regulated. And then above the window, we have something called hyperarousal, which is where we go into a state of kind of agitation or anger, or a kind of stress response. And then below the window is something called hypoarousal, which is more like a kind of freeze response. So if a feeling becomes too overwhelming, sometimes we might kind of go into more of a kind of frozen, closed, sort of shut down state. And I was wondering if that might be what was going on for your son. That's something, yeah, that I've noticed happening as well. There are different ways to deal with it, but it's good to be aware that, they're probably feeling quite unsafe in their bodies in that moment. So it might be, that they just need some visceral comfort. So, we might just need to kind of sit with them, maybe put a hand on them if they feel open to that, and just really kind of try and really gradually bring them back into a place where they feel safe. Sometimes it can be appropriate to move. So if they go into that very stuck state, getting them to walk to the kitchen to get a glass of water, or just kind of physically moving their bodies, can sometimes help to kind of bring them out of that state of hyperarousal. Yeah,
that's really interesting. There's one other something that I sometimes talk about with my clients as well, is around if a child can't verbalize what it is they're feeling, maybe they feel it in a particular place in their body, maybe they feel it in their tummy, maybe they feel it in their head, maybe they feel it in their shoulders, to sort of identify where they're feeling some sort of discomfort or something that's perhaps painful, and then maybe to soothe really gently that area, either with your hand or they can do that for themselves. That sometimes is quite a helpful strategy as well, perhaps.
Yeah, that's really nice. And I think it's fine for it to be quite a gradual process as well, and I think if you're kind of talking about feelings more, that that's something they will gradually kind of acclimatize to, and it'll become more of a usual part of their vocabulary.
I guess this is another example of why it's good not to hide our feelings, because our children learn, don't they, by role modeling and by watching what we're doing and then sort of copying it. And if we are squashing our feelings down, hiding our feelings, never letting them know how we're feeling about things, how will they learn that it's okay to do that themselves?
Yeah, and that's something that I forgot to mention in my talk actually, is that children tend to be highly attuned to us. So often if there's something going on for us and we're not talking about it, that can actually it can really freak them out, because they've got a sense something isn't right, but nobody's saying anything. And sometimes if your child's kind of, displaying certain behaviors, or they're kind of expressing really big feelings, you don't know why, it might be because there's a bit of dissonance, because they're kind of, on some level, they're kind of feeling what's going on for us. And so that's another reason that actually talking about it and letting everything be out in the open, in an age appropriate way, can be really helpful.
Yeah, And I suppose as well, there's a danger, isn't there, if we're not explaining our feelings, or we're not talking about our own feelings, and they are aware that there's something that's not quite right, they're going to write their own story about what's going on for us
Yeah,
as
exactly.
well. And they might come up with all kinds of things that are not correct at all.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, which could lead to problems. Okay, so it's a couple of other questions. So okay, so I don't know whether this is something that you are able to answer, but parental alienation. So when the children are repeating something that their other parent says about you, that you're lazy, you're badly organised, those kind of criticisms, and that they blame you for everything, what would you suggest would be some strategies perhaps to deal with that from the parent's position?
Yeah, I guess again a couple of layers. So one layer to that would be just to kind of do what you can to really strengthen your relationship with your child. So like I mentioned, kind of having quality one-to-one time with them every day, you know, finding places where your interests overlap and you can really enjoy spending time together, because if they have a positive relationship with you, they're less likely to be affected by or to kind of believe those sorts of negative comments from your ex-partner. But I think also just kind of addressing how those things make you feel, again without using blame language, but just kind of letting them know that actually it makes you feel really sad to hear that they're talking about you in that way.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I think whenever I come across this in my work, I always talk about making sure that, the only thing you can do is control yourself as a parent. You can't control the other parent.
Yeah.
So making sure that when the children are with you, that you are providing a safe space, that you're enabling them to be able to talk about their feelings, validating their feelings and all of those things, is really, really important. And focusing on that rather than focusing on trying to defend yourself from these things that are being thrown at you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you know, often these things can be reframed as a learning opportunity, because, you know,
Mm,
these sorts of experiences will happen, you know, throughout life. And so, um, you know, when it happens during childhood, there's that kind of opportunity for teaching.
mm, yeah. Right. So actually, this is potentially linked to that subject. So what would you do if your 14-year-old, for example, doesn't want to go to see the other parent? What kind of ideas would you have to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess on one level, it is their free choice whether they do or don't go. Um, I guess kind of making time and space just to explore the thoughts and feelings that they're having around that, and, you know, find out if you can come up with solutions together, you know, like whether it's a solvable problem or not. I guess it depends, you know,
Mm,
if there's something kind of potentially dangerous going on in the other household, it might not be appropriate for them to go there, but it could also be an opportunity for, you know, some creative solutions and dialogue.
yeah. There might be some legal input, I suspect, on this question as well.
I was about to actually jump in then. Thank you,
Yeah.
Claire. Sort of somewhat echoing what Nina said, it is important, I think, to try and get, and not in a sort of interrogation way, because of course we never want children to feel like one or other parent is interrogating them, or they're talking about a conversation that makes them uncomfortable. But there is this presumption that children should see both of their parents. Now, obviously, we don't have any guidance on what that should look like, or how it should take place, or who should see what when, because every family is completely unique and completely different. But if you're getting to a point where a child is saying, I don't want to go, I don't want to see them, I don't want to go to contact, whether or not there's a contact order in place or it's just an agreement, I think, sort of tagging on to what Nina said, we do need to think a bit more about what, if anything has happened, if it's, you know, your normal children getting upset with parents, how can we work around this? How can we rebuild a relationship? If there's something more going on, then really importantly, they need to know if there's something more going on, and how can we safeguard that? But importantly, with the age of 14, from a legal perspective, what the court won't do is they will not make an order for a child who's 16. So the closer we get to that magical age of 16, the more children are seen to be able to give their own thoughts and feelings, and those thoughts and feelings have a lot more weight, along with the reasons behind them. But importantly, that is the thing, is why are they feeling that way? And if it is something that can be fixed, absolutely we need to try and see what can be done to build on it. And if it's not something that can be fixed, or there's been something that's happened that is harmful, then obviously steps need to be taken to safeguard that child. But I think it becomes more of an issue if there is an existing court order in place, and that's when you get into the realms of she's not following the order or he's not following the order, and that's when you start all of that really fun stuff.
That goes back to one of the earlier questions, doesn't it, as well, a little bit, in terms of, you know, is there anything, you know, we were talking on a more practical level, but in legal perspective, you know, if there's a court order in place but either mum or dad doesn't turn up and disappoints the children regularly, are there legal things that you can do around that? If
you're, and I'm going to use the term resident parent in the sense that and I'm taking this on the very hypothetical situation that we've got a child living with one parent and they have contact with the other. If you're that resident parent who's taking the child to contact, or the other parent's supposed to be coming to collect, and you're finding yourself in situations repeatedly where it's not going ahead, it's not happening, you've tried to communicate, you've tried to work out what's going on, unless you're able to come to some sort of arrangement, you may need to consider whether this arrangement, if there is a court order in place, is actually working. And if it's not working, and if you're getting to the point where you're getting concerned that actually all of these repeated incidences are actually doing harm and we can't fix them, it's not working, we're not working together, not for lack of trying on one or other part, but it's not working, they may need to consider whether that needs to be returned to court to have it changed. Because unfortunately then you're in a situation where there's this order in place that is not working. It's not fit for purpose anymore. And you don't want to be bound by something that unfortunately doesn't work for anyone.
It's a really tricky situation, isn't it? Because, you know, one of the main things that I say to my clients all the time is you can control your own actions. You cannot control the actions of another person. And so it's very difficult for a court to enforce the other parent to pick up on time. So you can't.
The court can't physically march them down, march up to the door, knock on the door, drag them out and plant them there. Yes, they can, you know, there are things that can be done that are not pleasant, but you know, things like, well, you might get an order for costs, etc. But none of those things rectify that situation. And if it does get to that point where it's now becoming harmful, then that resident parent probably needs to have a sit down and consider, is this something I need to speak to a solicitor about, changing this order, because this simply isn't working anymore.
Yeah. And then I suppose you're getting into the realms of the part of all this that potentially does cause children damage, which is being caught in the middle of high conflict arguments and backwards and forth through the court system between their parents, which can be really damaging for children.
Yeah, absolutely. And no court is keen to have children going through the system at all. I think I mentioned before we joined on this, they were trialing a new way of dealing with children matters up in North Wales, and I think from what we've heard, it's probably going to filter down. But the emphasis on that really is trying to give parents an outcome that they can work on together, and helping them build ways that they can work on this together, and realizing that it's never always going to be an order that works forever. You might have a child who's 6, but is that still going to work in 7-8 years time? Possibly not. And to prevent them coming back, how do we work on this now in 5-6 years time without them revisiting? So it's probably going to filter down at some point, but that's the issue, is where we are now. Ultimately the court does cause conflict. It is something that unfortunately has to happen sometimes.
I think you know, one of the things you were just talking about in terms of, you know, going through the court system and so on, one of the things that can really help to bring those things out of the court system is sometimes working with mediators and things like that, but also working with people like myself or Nina who can help parents to communicate more effectively, or help, in my case, I work generally just with one person. I'm not sure if Nina, if you ever work with both, but helping those parents with communication skills so that they can actually create a better parenting relationship, whether that's co-parenting or parallel parenting or whatever it might be. But changing perhaps some of the things that they're doing that may help change the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is sort of the focus on this trial. And I am hopeful it does come through, because it does seem to be working really well for the parents where it is at the moment. And it does sort of see a more holistic approach to what agencies can help these parents stay out of this arena, work on this together. And that is the most important thing, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I find it really helpful. I've worked with kind of two members of a couple or ex-partners separately, and that can make a really big difference in terms of the whole family dynamic. But yeah, according to family systems theory, that actually even if just one person within the dynamic kind of makes a sincere change, so that they really work on the things that I've described in terms of, like working through all of the, the painful feelings to get to a point of forgiveness, that actually it might sound a little bit hippie, but it can make a really big difference in terms of how that whole dynamic functions and kind of shifting the balance.
I think that's absolutely right. I always say to people, that the person with the most flexibility of behaviour has the greatest influence. So if you can be that parent who is flexible in how you are talking, how you're behaving, what you're doing, the things you're suggesting, then that can really shift the other parent sometimes just by definition of something different happening in the relationship. So yes, if you can be flexible, then that will be really helpful. I think let's quick check in the chat. So I think the question about non-neurotypical children, but I think Kate has, so there's a separate webinar that's going to run on supporting neurodiverse children through divorce. So click on that and book a seat on there. I don't think there are any more questions. Oh, no, here we go. So somebody else, this is a legal question actually. If you need to change a court order due to the other parent not following it, can you effectively charge your ex-partner your legal costs?
That's a difficult one, because costs in family proceedings aren't as strict as they are, say, if you're suing someone. So if you're going in through the civil process and you're suing somebody, it's the winner has their costs paid by the loser. And that's pretty much across the board for any sort of civil matter you may have. That isn't necessarily the case in children proceedings, and that's what I mean by contact issues. It's not as straightforward as you brought us back here to court because of your actions, therefore we're going to get cost. Now, there's absolutely no reason why you can't ask. There's absolutely no reason why you or your legal representative can't put forward that case to say, well, we wouldn't have been here if you hadn't acted a certain way. But I can't give, and I don't think anybody really give, a yes or a no to that one, as you can if this was a civil matter, because like I said, the court doesn't throw around costs orders quite like they do in civil matters, in family matters, because their focus is solely what is the best interest of those children.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any more questions that anybody would like to ask? Otherwise, I think it would be really helpful, Nina, if you could perhaps just tell us a little bit about how you work and the kinds of services that you perhaps offer, so that people can have a think about, whether that's something they'd like to look into. I'll also put a link into Nina's calendar in the chat if anybody would like to book a quick chat with her.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I'd also really love it if you type in the chat what your biggest takeaway from today was. So if there was anything that was particularly helpful for you, it'd be great if you could share that in the chat. So obviously I've given some general advice. I would be really happy to do a one-to-one session with you. So the first session is always free, and you just need to click on the Calendly link to book in a time. So yeah, I do one-to-one work with parents, and the work I do is focused around giving you the tools that you need to support your child more effectively around whatever difficult things they might be going through. I look at how to kind of figure out what your boundaries are, and get really clear about those in relationship to the values that are most important to you about family life. I also support you to kind of look more deeply at yourself, so kind of look at your own childhood, and any kind of blocks that might be affecting you in terms of being really present and available for your children. So yeah, feel free to click on the Calendly link and book in a time if you're curious and you'd like to kind of find out more.
Thank you very much. Abigail, before we check out, could you just very briefly go over that answer about costs again, because I think the person who asked the question wasn't quite sure about the answer.
I was just in the middle of typing an answer, so I thought let's see if we could do a quick one. But if I
very quick.
Basically, what I meant to say was, say we were in a money claim, so a money case where you haven't paid my bill of whatever, or you haven't paid my company X amount, and the presumption there, or the usual process there, is whoever wins that case would have all of their legal costs paid for by the person who loses that case. There isn't that rule or that presumption or that idea in a family matter, like when we're dealing with children. So just because you might apply to go back to court to deal with an application that needs to change because of somebody's actions, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will be able to claim the costs against them. There's absolutely entirely your prerogative to make that case to a judge if you're before a judge and say, this is why I'm back in court, it is this person's behaviour, I have had to pay for X amount of legal costs, I think I should be able to be recouped, to be reimbursed. And it's down to the judge if they feel that this should be paid. But what we can't give is a yes, they will definitely pay your costs, or no, they won't pay your costs, because it's very much dependent on your circumstances, the circumstances of the case, and the discretion of the judge on the actual day. I hope that's better for those who wanted that question.
Thank you very much. So if there aren't any more questions, just a quick peek, can't see any. Don't think so. All that remains for me to say is thank you so much, Nina, for coming to talk to us today. I think there's so many takeaways there, and somebody actually has put into the chat that the big message they liked was that message of forgiveness and being open with children in an age appropriate way. Is a really powerful one. So thank you very much for sharing all of that with us, and your expertise and your obvious knowledge, really, superior knowledge about this topic. So we're very grateful, and thank you very much for coming along.
I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I hope that everybody got what they needed from the session. So we'll be sending out a follow-up email afterwards with links and so on. There'll be links to Nina's website, etc. in there, in case anybody would like to contact her, and mine will be in there in case anyone would like to contact me too. So all that remains is to say thank you very much for coming. We hope to see you again another time. Thank you.